She asked the same question over and over, pushing, pressing, refusing to let go, until Karoline had enough. What happened next stunned the entire room. The press briefing room in Washington, D.C. was packed. Every seat filled, every journalist on edge, every camera trained on the podium. The air buzzed with tension, a collective anticipation humming beneath the surface. This wasn't just another press briefing. It felt charged, electric, like something was about to crack wide open. At the front of the room, Karoline Leavitt adjusted the microphone. "Good afternoon, everyone. Let's get started immediately." Her voice was steady, composed. As soon as the words left her lips, hands shot up across the room. Reporters hungry for a headline, eager to get their question in before the frenzy took over. She picked the first journalist, a familiar face from a major network. He cleared his throat and dove straight in. "Ms. Leavitt, can you clarify the administration's stance on the new tax cuts? There are concerns about their long-term effects on the middle class." Karoline gave a small nod. This was expected. A routine policy question, one she was more than prepared for. "The administration remains committed to economic policies that create opportunity for all Americans," she said smoothly, her response measured and rehearsed. "These tax cuts are designed to stimulate growth, support businesses, and ultimately benefit middle-class families across the country." A few scribbles of pens, some murmurs, but no interruptions. Another journalist followed up, shifting the conversation toward education reform. Again, Karoline responded without hesitation, her words crisp, confident, and deliberate. She had done this countless times before, navigating the press, controlling the message, keeping the focus exactly where she wanted it. And then it happened. A voice cut through the room, sharper than the rest. "Ms. Leavitt, let's talk about the real issue here." The energy shifted. It was her. Karoline knew the reporter well, the liberal firebrand who never just asked a question. She staged a confrontation. Aggressive, combative, always looking for that one moment that would go viral. Seated near the front, the reporter leaned forward, a smirk curling at the edge of her lips. She twirled her pen between her fingers, tapping it rhythmically against her notepad. Karoline met her gaze. "Go ahead." The reporter wasted no time. "Do you think the administration's policies are intentionally designed to suppress certain communities? Because the data suggests..." Karoline lifted a hand, cutting her off before she could turn a statement into a monologue. "I've answered that question before," she said firmly. "The administration is focused on policies that benefit all Americans, regardless of background. If you'd like to discuss the specifics of today's topic, I'm happy to continue." A few murmurs rippled through the room. Some reporters exchanged glances, sensing where this might be headed, but the reporter wasn't done. She leaned in, pushing further. "You didn't actually answer the question, though. Can you directly address whether..." "I did answer," Karoline interrupted, her voice firm but even. She scanned the room, signaling her readiness to move on. For a moment, there was a brief pause, a flicker of silence. Then, "I just don't see why you're avoiding it," the reporter pressed, her voice slicing through the space like a blade. "It's a simple yes or no. Are these policies suppressing marginalized groups?" The temperature in the room shifted. The press corps tensed, journalists glancing at one another, some intrigued, others uncomfortable. No one liked a press conference turning into a full-blown showdown. But that's exactly what was happening. Karoline inhaled slowly. "I'm not avoiding anything. I'm staying on topic," she said, voice calm, unwavering. "If you have a question related to today's discussion, I'll gladly answer. If not, I'll be moving on." But the reporter wasn't backing down. She leaned even closer to the microphone, her eyes locked onto Karoline's. "So that's a no comment?" A hush fell over the room. Not just silence. A moment. A weighted pause. The kind that wasn't empty, but charged. Karoline's jaw tightened. Just slightly. It was subtle, but the cameras caught it. Everything was being recorded. Every movement, every expression, every flicker of emotion was potential fuel for the next viral clip. She adjusted her stance, both hands resting on the podium. "I've answered your question," she said evenly. "I'll be moving on now." She pointed toward a journalist in the back, ready to shift the conversation. But before they could speak, that same voice again. "Why is it so hard for you to give a straight answer?" A flicker of irritation crossed Karoline's face. Barely noticeable. A brief tightening around her eyes, but for those paying close attention, it was there. She knew how this worked. She knew what this was. Reporters had a job to do. She respected that. But there was a difference between pressing for accountability and turning a press conference into a personal stage. And right now, it was crystal clear which one this was. A few cameras shifted, panning between Karoline and the reporter, capturing every angle, every subtle shift in energy that could be spun into a headline. Karoline inhaled through her nose, steadying herself. "I don't believe in wasting anyone's time," she said. "If you have a new question, I'll answer it. Otherwise, I'd like to give others a chance." The reporter smirked. "Sure. New question." A pause. Then, "Why is this administration so afraid of transparency?" A few quiet gasps. Some reporters stiffened. Others scribbled furiously, recognizing the moment for what it was. A test. Karoline gave a slow, measured blink. Her grip on the podium tightened for a fraction of a second before she let go, exhaling just slightly. The room was watching. Every single person, waiting for the next move. Karoline took her time before speaking. "We are completely transparent," she said, voice steady. "That's why we hold these briefings. That's why I'm standing here right now, answering your questions. But transparency is a two-way street. It requires fairness and responsibility." The reporter opened her mouth, ready to cut in again. Karoline held up a hand. "I've given you time," she said, her tone sharpening just enough to command the room. "Now I'm going to give someone else a chance to ask their question." The room shifted, tension stretched in the air. The reporter looked ready to push again. But she didn't. Not yet. Karoline turned away from her, pointed to another journalist. A moment passed. The new reporter hesitated before speaking. Then finally, "Ms. Leavitt, regarding the administration's economic policies." Just like that, the focus shifted. The moment diffused. But the weight of what had happened still hung in the air. And Karoline knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. She smiled. But it wasn't the warm, diplomatic smile that politicians and press secretaries mastered over years of public service. It wasn't the kind meant to ease tensions, to smooth over disagreements, to create the illusion of civility. No, this was something else. This smile was sharp, knowing. A quiet, deliberate expression that said, "I see exactly what you're trying to do." She let the silence linger just long enough. Transparency? Karoline finally said, her voice smooth, measured. That's exactly what this administration stands for. But what you're doing isn't about transparency. It's about theatrics. The words sliced through the air, clear and unflinching. The reporter's smirk flickered, just for a moment. A tiny shift, barely noticeable. But Karoline caught it. So did the cameras. And then, a cough from the back. A veteran journalist, seated near the rear of the room, cleared his throat. Karoline, if I could, but before he could finish, the same voice interrupted again. So, you're dismissing valid concerns as theatrics? The reporter's tone was razor-sharp, designed to provoke. The American people deserve real answers. The cameras caught everything. The slight tilt of Karoline's head, the way the other journalists shifted in their seats. Some clearly frustrated that the event had been hijacked. Others leaning in, sensing the tension, knowing that moments like this made headlines. A few murmured to each other. A veteran journalist, someone who had covered politics for decades, leaned back and muttered to his colleague, "This isn't journalism. This is performance art." But the reporter didn't care. She knew exactly what she was doing. The longer she kept this going, the more likely it was to explode online. A fiery confrontation, one that felt personal, one that looked like a government official dodging tough questions. It was social media gold. Karoline saw it too. She had a choice: engage and give the moment more fuel, or shut it down entirely. She let out a slow sigh, barely noticeable, and flicked her gaze toward security standing at the side of the room. She didn't have to say anything. The shift in her eyes was enough, and the entire room felt it. A new kind of tension settled over the space, heavy, thick, charged with unspoken energy. No one moved. No one spoke. But everyone knew what that look meant. This was no longer just an argument. It was about to escalate. Karoline could see it. The way some of the journalists avoided eye contact. Others gripping their pens just a little tighter. They weren't just watching. They were waiting. The reporter, a woman in her mid-30s with sharp eyes and an unwavering posture, didn't budge. She was still leaning forward, pen resting against her notepad, that quiet smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. She wasn't here to ask a question. She was here to make a point. Karoline straightened, adjusting her stance at the podium. "I'll say this one more time," she said, her voice low and steady, a quiet authority wrapping around every word. "If you have a relevant question, I will answer it. But I'm not going to stand here and engage in bad faith arguments." The reporter chuckled softly, shaking her head, as if amused. "Bad faith, Karoline?" she said, her voice laced with mock disbelief. "I'm doing my job. Isn't that what a free press is for?" Karoline didn't blink. "A free press is about holding people accountable," she said, her voice unshaken. "What you're doing is trying to turn this into a spectacle." The room shifted. A few quiet murmurs rippled through the space. Some journalists stole quick glances at one another, sensing the moment had transformed. This wasn't about policy anymore. It was something else. A power play, a test of control, and Karoline knew exactly how this worked. She exhaled through her nose, just barely, then turned slightly, enough to indicate the conversation was over. But it wasn't. Not for the reporter, not for the cameras, and not for the audience beyond this room. The millions watching, scrolling, waiting for their next viral moment. The fallout begins. The moment didn't just end in that briefing room. It followed Karoline. Through the winding hallways, up the elevator, straight into her office, where her aides were already glued to their screens. She barely had time to sit before one of them spun around, eyes wide with urgency. "She's everywhere," the aide said, scrolling through an endless stream of headlines. Karoline knew exactly who she meant. The reporter. She didn't need to look. She could feel it. She leaned against her desk, arms crossed, staring at the wall for a beat. "She's getting booked on every major network," another aide added. "Of course she is." Karoline tilted her head back, staring at the ceiling for a brief second before pushing off the desk. "She wanted this," she muttered. "And we just gave it to her." The aide bit her lip. "So, what's the play here?" Karoline didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the window, looking down at the street below. Reporters were already gathering outside, waiting for her next move. Cameras, microphones. The cycle was already in motion. And she knew she had a choice. Stay quiet. Let the moment run its course. Let it burn out on its own. Or get ahead of it before the narrative hardened. Her jaw tightened. The fight wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. The noise outside was growing. Karoline remained still, hands resting on her desk, as her aides continued scrolling through reaction after reaction. "They're split," one aide said finally. Karoline turned. "How split?" The aide hesitated. "Some are calling it justified," she said carefully, "saying you handled an unprofessional disruption the way any press secretary should. Others," she trailed off. Karoline arched a brow. "Others?" The aide sighed. "They're painting it as an attack on democracy." Silence. Then, Karoline smirked. "An attack on democracy?" she repeated, amusement curling in her voice. "For removing a reporter who refused to follow the rules?" The aide didn't respond. She didn't have to, because the answer was already playing out in real time, on the TV screens flashing across news stations, on the tweets racking up thousands of retweets, on the talk shows already framing the confrontation as something bigger, something symbolic. Karoline exhaled, turning back toward the window. She had been in this game long enough to know. This wasn't about what actually happened. It was about perception. And in politics, perception was everything. She drummed her fingers against the windowsill, thinking, calculating. Then she turned back to her team. "Get me a statement," she said. Aide number 1 nodded, reaching for her laptop. "What angle do you want to take?" Karoline's gaze was steady. "The truth," she said simply. A pause. Then, "But make it headline-worthy." They both knew the truth didn't matter, not in the fast-moving world of digital outrage. It wasn't about facts. It wasn't about context. It was about who controlled the narrative first. And right now, the reporter was ahead. A second aide stepped in, holding up his phone. His face was tight, shoulders slightly hunched, as if already bracing for impact. "She just posted her full statement," he said. Karoline took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Let's hear it." He read from the screen. "Today, I was removed from a press conference for doing my job, asking tough questions. This administration claims to value transparency, but when faced with real scrutiny, they silence the press. This should alarm every American who believes in accountability and free speech. Karoline let out a short laugh. It was sharp, almost amused. And let me guess, no mention of how she disrupted the entire event? The aide shook his head. Nope, just playing the victim. Of course, it was all so predictable. The selective editing, the carefully framed posts, the dramatic claims of suppression, spun just the right way to fit the narrative she wanted. Karoline had seen this game played before. Now, she had a choice. Her first instinct was to go on offense, to call a press briefing, lay out exactly what had happened, and remind the public that removing a disruptive journalist was not the same as silencing the press. But she knew how that would play out. The moment she engaged, the cycle would keep spinning. The narrative wouldn't die. It would evolve. More outrage, more speculation, more fuel thrown onto the fire. She turned back to the window. Outside, a news van pulled up. Another reporter stepped out, microphone in hand. The coverage wasn't slowing down. She tapped her fingers against the desk, her mind moving fast. What's our strongest play? The first aide hesitated, then spoke carefully. We could release the full, unedited footage before her version gets too much traction. Let people see for themselves how many times you warned her before security stepped in. The second aide nodded. That way, it doesn't look like a defensive move, just transparency. Karoline considered it. It was a smart move. Let the facts speak for themselves. But she also knew that facts alone didn't win battles. Perception did. Her eyes flicked back to her phone, where notifications kept rolling in. She could already predict the cable news segments, the outrage panel discussions, the op-eds dissecting her decision. A long breath in, a slow exhale. Then she nodded, released the full footage. Her aides moved quickly, drafting a statement, queuing up the video. Karoline watched them work, her mind already 10 steps ahead. The reporter had wanted a spectacle. What she didn't realize was that Karoline wasn't just reacting. She was setting the stage for what came next. The full, unedited footage went live within the hour. No flashy edits, no dramatic commentary, just a simple post with the raw exchange, letting people see exactly what had happened. The title was clear and direct. Watch for yourself. The full exchange between Karoline Leavitt and the reporter at today's press conference. No spin, no manipulation, just reality. Karoline sat back in her chair, watching as the numbers ticked upward. Thousands of views in minutes. Comments flooding in, some furious, some supportive. Her phone buzzed. A message from a close ally in the media. Smart move. This takes the wind out of their sails. But Karoline knew it wasn't that simple. The spin was already in motion. The reporter herself had gone on multiple networks, retelling the story in a way that painted herself as the victim. Karoline clicked on one of the interviews. There she was, seated in a dimly lit studio, brows furrowed in righteous indignation. I was simply doing my job, she told the anchor, her voice steady, practiced. I was asking tough but necessary questions, and instead of addressing them, I was removed. That should worry everyone, regardless of political affiliation. The anchor nodded solemnly. Did you feel threatened? Karoline rolled her eyes. Threatened. The reporter's sigh was almost theatrical. Not physically, no. But professionally? Absolutely. This is an attack on journalism itself. The interview cut to a panel of experts, all weighing in on what this really meant. Dangerous precedent. A disturbing moment for free speech. She was just doing what journalists are supposed to do. Karoline exhaled sharply, locking her phone screen. The facts were out there. But that didn't mean people would accept them. Because that wasn't how this game worked. It didn't matter that the footage showed the reality of the exchange. It didn't matter that she had given the reporter multiple chances to ask a relevant question. It didn't even matter that security had only stepped in after repeated warnings. What mattered was the story that people wanted to believe. And right now, a certain section of the public wanted to believe this was an attack on the press because it fit their worldview, because it confirmed their biases, because it felt true, even if it wasn't. Karoline leaned forward, elbows resting on her desk, fingers interlocked. Her aides were still watching the reaction online, scanning headlines, monitoring engagement. But Karoline had already moved on to the next step, because this wasn't about a single press conference. This was about who controlled the next move. The host was playing the full clip, the one Karoline had released, pausing at key moments. She interrupts over and over, he said, shaking his head. This wasn't journalism, this was grandstanding. The panelists nodded in agreement. This was a setup, one of them said. She knew exactly what she was doing. Push until she gets removed, then play the victim. The host turned back to the camera. Here's the reality. Karoline Leavitt didn't shut down the press. She shut down an activist posing as a journalist. Karoline crossed her arms, watching as the conversation played out. The split was clear. On one side, conservative voices praising her for standing her ground. On the other, mainstream outlets, painting her as an authoritarian figure, silencing the press. Her aide glanced at her. This is going to be a long week. Karoline nodded. Yeah, but at least now the truth is out there. The question was, who would believe it? The story refused to die. For days it dominated headlines, talk shows, and social media debates. Political commentators dissected every second of the exchange, each side twisting the narrative to fit their agenda. Memes flooded the internet, some mocking the reporter, others portraying Karoline as a villain silencing free speech. It was everywhere, trending on Twitter, blasted across news cycles, debated in op-eds and think pieces. One moment, one press conference, and now it had turned into something bigger. Karoline expected the noise. She'd been in politics long enough to know how these things worked. But still, this was different. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about what journalism had become. She scrolled through the coverage, noting the patterns. The outrage machine spun on both sides. One group painting her as a hero, the other as a villain. Neither cared about the actual truth. They just needed a story. And this one was too good to pass up. Karoline sat in her office, watching a clip from the latest panel discussion. The host was playing the full clip, the one Karoline had released, pausing at key moments. She interrupts over and over, he said, shaking his head. This wasn't journalism, this was grandstanding. The panelists nodded in agreement. This was a setup, one of them said. She knew exactly what she was doing. Push until she gets removed, then play the victim. The host turned back to the camera. Here's the reality. Karoline Leavitt didn't shut down the press. She shut down an activist posing as a journalist. Karoline crossed her arms, watching as the conversation played out. The split was clear. On one side, conservative voices praising her for standing her ground. On the other, mainstream outlets, painting her as an authoritarian figure, silencing the press. Her aide glanced at her. This is going to be a long week. Karoline nodded. Yeah, but at least now the truth is out there. The question was, who would believe it? The story refused to die. For days it dominated headlines, talk shows, and social media debates. Political commentators dissected every second of the exchange, each side twisting the narrative to fit their agenda. Memes flooded the internet, some mocking the reporter, others portraying Karoline as a villain silencing free speech. It was everywhere, trending on Twitter, blasted across news cycles, debated in op-eds and think pieces. One moment, one press conference, and now it had turned into something bigger. Karoline expected the noise. She'd been in politics long enough to know how these things worked. But still, this was different. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about what journalism had become. She scrolled through the coverage, noting the patterns. The outrage machine spun on both sides. One group painting her as a hero, the other as a villain. Neither cared about the actual truth. They just needed a story. And this one was too good to pass up. Karoline sat in her office, watching a clip from the latest panel discussion. Then, something caught her attention. A veteran journalist, one she actually respected, leaned forward in his chair. "We have to be honest," he said. This wasn't a journalist seeking the truth. This was someone looking for a viral moment, and they got it. The other panelists shifted uncomfortably. She asked a question, got an answer, didn't like it, and kept pushing, not for clarity, but for conflict. And the moment she got removed, she ran straight to the cameras claiming victimhood. That's not reporting, that's activism. Karoline exhaled slowly. Finally, someone had said it. But she knew the damage was already done. Her aide knocked softly, stepping inside. "You have an interview request from—" "No," Karoline said immediately. The aide blinked. "You don't even know who it's from." "I don't care," Karoline said, standing up. "I'm not playing into this any further." The truth was out. Let them do what they wanted with it. She grabbed her phone, scrolled through the endless notifications. The storm would pass. It always did. But this wasn't just about one press conference. It was about something bigger. It was about the game. And Karoline had just reminded everyone. She knew exactly how it was played.